I would also say that I just think physicists are among the smartest people in the world. There was a study that came out recently where they were showing like average IQ of students who had finished their PhD across different disciplines. And it said something like archaeology was in the 140s and psychology was in the high 140s and so on and so on. It went, and the highest was physics. I think it was like 162 or 160 something. And I actually took umbrage with that. I was like, no, there's not that small of a gap between psychologists and physicists because a lot of modern psychology to me almost borders on charlatanism. Just look up the replication crisis if you want to see an example of what I mean. So I didn't trust those numbers off the bat, so I looked at the underlying paper. And the underlying paper was really interesting. The methodology that the author used was she basically gave them all tests in various disciplines and subjects, but trying to be broad, like the SAT, right? So she gave them verbal and she gave them math and critical thinking and all that. And what happened was the physicists aced the math tests almost to a T. All of them nailed it completely. Because any test that is challenging for a psychologist or can measure or a psychiatrist is essentially trivial for a physicist, or any test that could measure the difference between two physicists would be impossible for any psychiatrist or psychologist. So she dropped the math results for the physicists. She didn't take it into account when calculating their scores. So basically, they crushed the entire field just on verbal and basic logic reasoning, and the math was so off the charts she couldn't even include it in the results. So that to me was very, very telling. And I think the reason why physicists are so intelligent is it's not that being a physicist makes you intelligent. It's just that the bar to being a good physicist is very high intelligence, because you're dealing with reality in its ultimate form. You're dealing with absolute truth. And so it's up to you to rise to the occasion and to develop such a rigorous way of reasoning, thinking, and calculating, and all the skills that go with it, including the advanced mathematics, that you can communicate with reality in its own terms. You're not communicating with other humans who limit you to human levels and will give you a pass. For example, if I'm trying to be a macroeconomist, well, macroeconomists pretty much get everything wrong. You'll never find a macroeconomist who can consistently predict the direction of the macroeconomy, nor can you run a counterfactual test. So macroeconomists and macroeconomics, even though there's a lot of good rules of thumb and some explanations in the field, in practice, it ends up being about pleasing and convincing other people. So your feedback loop just isn't as tight. I would argue that someone who's trading cryptocurrencies or stocks actually has a tighter feedback loop, because at least they're taking feedback from a market rather than, say, from a publication or a small group of individuals. So in that sense, they're closer to the truth, closer to truth seeking, or feedback from what is true. But physicists have the ultimate feedback from what is true, because a particle is not going to listen to a physicist because they have a PhD or a high rank. And so they're forced to correspond to reality. And obviously the physical chemistry and other sciences, the hard sciences, the natural sciences, all have the same type feedback loop, although there's probably tight tests in physics and mathematics.